Welcome to Time of Death. This video is for informational purposes and in no way meant to glorify or condone violence. In today's video, we'll be discussing the murder of Celine Patricia Mayoral. Mayoral was shot and killed on Thursday, September 6, 2012, in the 4100 block of Alma Avenue in Lynwood, according to LA County coroner records. Juan Diego Valencia was subsequently arrested and charged with the murder. The following is the evidence at trial. Celine Mayoral, age 24, lived with her parents and worked part-time at Kenwood. On the evening of September 5, 2012, Celine told her mother, Graciela Mayoral, that she was going out with a male friend from work and would be back the next day. Celine packed a bag with clothing she intended to launder and left the family home on foot. Mrs. Mayoral was concerned with Celine because she had been staying with friends a lot, and Ms. Mayoral feared Celine had relapsed into using methamphetamine, as she had when she was a teen. At about 3 p.m. the next day, Mrs. Mayoral spoke to Celine by phone and all was well. Celine said she was sleepy. Celine phoned Mrs. Mayoral around 5 p.m., but Mrs. Mayoral missed the call. She called Celine back about 20 times, but Celine did not answer. At 5:32 p.m., Celine sent Mrs. Mayoral a text message asking to be picked up. A little later, they spoke about Celine's location. Celine said the address was written down in her room, but Mrs. Mayoral did not find it. Celine told her she was in Hawthorne on Shadron and 139th Street. Celine said someone wanted to take her cell phone, and Mrs. Mayoral told her to tell the gentleman who had her to return her. If not, she would call the police. Celine's father drove to the area, and Celine and Mrs. Mayoral exchanged several text messages around 5:55 p.m. One said, "Mom, I'm going." Nonetheless, Celine's father returned home without her. Celine phoned her mother at around 6:30 p.m. and said they were threatening her and keeping her in a dark room and she could not leave. Later, Celine called her mother from a different phone and said her cell phone had been taken. Mrs. Mayoral heard Celine telling Juan not to hurt her, to let her go home to her mother, and that she believed he was good. Thereafter, Mrs. Mayoral heard conversation back and forth. Celine then said, "I'm okay. The person is taking me home." Mrs. Mayoral said that she was at Celine's location. Celine told her to leave because Juan did not want her to know where he lived. The last thing Mrs. Mayoral heard was Celine screaming. Deputy Jonathan Montes was on patrol in Lynwood in a marked Sheriff's Department vehicle at 11:15 p.m. on September 6 when he saw a green Mercury driving with its high-beam headlights on. After the car made an unsignaled left turn, Montes followed it. Montes could see there were two occupants who appeared to be conversing. Montes turned on his flashing lights to effect a traffic stop. The Mercury pulled to the curve, and Montes parked 1 to 2 car lengths behind it. Montes immediately saw a flash of light inside the Mercury and heard a gunshot. The Mercury then sped away. Montes pursued the Mercury with all of its emergency lights on and radioed for assistance. Soon, several other sheriff patrol vehicles and a helicopter joined the pursuit. The Mercury drove in excess of the speed limit and ran several stop signs and a red light. As the Mercury made her turn, Montes saw the passenger's head slide toward the center of the car, but he never saw it come back up. The Mercury slowed as it reached the intersection of Josephine and Harris Streets in Lynwood, then came to a stop. Montes stopped his patrol car behind it. The driver of the Mercury, whom Montes identified at trial as defendant, reached across the car, opened the passenger side door, pushed the passenger out into the street, then drove away. A video recording of this was played at trial. Most of the deputies resumed the pursuit of the Mercury, but several stopped where the body was dumped. Deputy Victor Rascon testified Celine appeared to be dead when he first saw her. Paramedics later pronounced her dead at the scene. Pursued by Montes and many other deputies, defendant drove west on the 105 freeway at an average of 85 miles per hour and drove to the 14,000 block of Chadron Avenue in Hawthorne. Defendant stopped his car in the middle of the street and ran toward an apartment building, leaving the engine and headlights on and the driver door open. Montes saw a gun fall from defendant's waistband area onto the ground. The gun was a loaded .45 caliber Colt semi-automatic. Montes and Deputy Nikolai Vavakin pursued defendant on foot and saw him enter the third-floor apartment. Vavakin kicked in the door of the apartment and saw defendant standing in front of him. Vavakin ordered defendant to come out, but defendant ran out of sight. Defendant's cousin, Jesse Valencia, came out, but defendant ignored deputies' orders to surrender. The deputies summoned a special team that had police dogs, and defendant eventually surrendered and was arrested. Thereafter, defendant's half-brother also emerged from the apartment. Deputies Christopher Gomez and Brandon Patton escorted and guarded defendant at the scene. Patton told Gomez he was waiting for a gunshot residue kit before putting defendant into a patrol car. Defendant then made a spontaneous statement to which both deputies testified. According to Patton, defendant said, "You're going to execute me? If you're going to execute me, look me in the face when you do it." I looked at her. Patton testified defendant made another spontaneous statement as he and Gomez were driving defendant to the command post. "You're going to shoot me in the head like I did her?" Later, as deputies were taking Jesse Valencia out of Patton's patrol car to put defendant in that car, defendant said to Jesse in a low voice, "Hey fool, I killed her." Gomez testified that defendant at some point spontaneously said, "Hey, I know you're going to execute me. If you're going to do it in my head like I did her." During the booking process, defendant admitted he was a member of Young Crowd and made a gang hand signal while Patton photographed him. Defendant also had lived in the apartment from which he was extracted from, and he had used methamphetamine on September 6. Defendant had several tattoos related to his gang, including YC on his abdomen and on each bicep. Lynwood with bullet holes depicted over the end, signifying disrespect to the rival neighborhood Crips, and SSLA on his leg. Deputy Medical Examiner Paul Glinnigy, who performed the autopsy on Celine, testified that she had been shot through the head, with the bullet entering her left ear and exiting behind her right ear. The trajectory of the shot was from left to right, 10 degrees downward, and 20 degrees front to back. The presence of soot and absence of stippling demonstrated that it was a contact shot. The gun was close to the skin. It would have been rapidly fatal. Following the trial, the jury convicted defendant of second-degree murder and evading an officer with willful disregard. The jury found defendant fired a gun, causing death, but found the gang enhancement allegation not true. The court sentenced defendant to prison for an aggregate term of 47 years to life. Celine Patricia Mayoral was 24 years old at the time of death.